The scent of lemon-scented disinfectant and lukewarm apple slices always seemed to cling to the curtains in my living room. I spent most of my Tuesday afternoons on my hands and knees, scrubbing the linoleum in the kitchen area of my ranch house. My home daycare was my pride, but by 4 o'clock, the floor usually looked like a battlefield of dried glue and crushed Cheerios. I pushed the scrub brush in tight circles, my shoulder aching from the effort, while 2 toddlers napped in the adjacent room, and a 4-year-old watched a cartoon in the den. Living in Jonesboro meant the humidity usually hit us like a wet blanket by mid-May, and the air conditioner in our older subdivision house struggled to keep up. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist, leaving a streak of gray soap behind. I liked the routine. I liked knowing exactly where the blocks went, and which child needed the extra nap. It was a predictable kind of exhaustion. Around 5, the kids headed home to their parents, and the house finally fell quiet. I didn't go straight to the shower. Instead, I moved to the dining room table, which had become the unofficial headquarters for my brother-in-law's rental business. Logan James, Anthony's older brother, worked as a bank branch supervisor, but he'd spent the last 3 years building a portfolio of small residential rentals around town. He called it a family venture. In reality, that meant I handled the scheduling, the tenant screenings, and the bookkeeping for my kitchen table, while he managed the high-level finances and the legal titles. Logan told me it was a temporary arrangement. He said once the business stabilized and the cash flow became consistent, he'd formalize everything and bring me on as a partner or a paid manager. I believed him because he was the successful one in the family, and because I liked the idea of having something more than the daycare income as I got older. Anthony walked through the front door at 5:30, his tie loosened and his face looking gray. He'd been the office manager at the local middle school for a decade, and the end of the semester always wore him down to a nub. He dropped his briefcase by the door and slumped into a chair. "The payroll software glitched again," Anthony said, rubbing his eyes. "I spent 3 hours arguing with the district office about a teacher's overtime. It's a mess. Tanya, I think I might have to spend my Saturday in the office just to get the audit straight." I didn't look up from the ledger I was balancing for Logan. I was trying to figure out why the plumbing bill for the property on 4th Street was 20% higher than the estimate. "That sounds like a headache. But it's just a software glitch, Anthony," I said, my voice flat. "I've spent my whole day managing a toddler's meltdown and scrubbing the floor. I can't even find the receipt for the new water filters Logan ordered. My plate is actually full right now." Anthony paused, his hand still on his face. He looked at me for a second, then slowly let his hand drop. "Right, sorry, I forgot you're doing the books today." "I'm doing the books every day," I muttered, scribbling a note in the margin. I felt a flicker of guilt, but I pushed it aside. I had spent the last 6 hours as a glorified janitor and a peacekeeper for 3-year-olds. I felt I had earned the right to be the priority in the house for a few hours. I ranked the stress of a school payroll error as a small problem compared to the physical and mental drain of my day. I didn't ask him how the rest of his day had gone. I just wanted the ledger to balance. The phone on the table buzzed. It was a call from Marcus, one of the contractors Logan used for the rental properties. I picked it up on the second ring. "Hey, Marcus," I said. "Hey, Tanya. Just calling to let you know, I've got the crew scheduled for Thursday morning at the 4th Street place. We're going to go ahead and rip out the old flooring and put in the luxury vinyl planks, like we talked about. Thanks for giving me the green light on the upgrade. It'll definitely bump up the rental value." I froze, the pen hovering over the page. "Wait, what upgrade?" "The vinyl planks," Marcus said, sounding confused. "You told me last week that Logan was on the fence, but you approved the higher quote because the carpet was too far gone." "I've already ordered the materials. We're good to go for Thursday." I stared at the ledger. I had never spoken to Marcus about flooring. I had mentioned to Logan that the carpet was stained, but Logan had told me he wanted to wait until the next quarter to spend any more capital on that unit. I had never given an approval for anything, let alone a luxury upgrade that would cost several $1,000s. "Marcus, I didn't approve any flooring," I said, my voice rising. You did, he replied, his tone shifting to that polite, cautious voice people use when they think they're being lied to. We talked on Tuesday. You said Logan had given you the authority to sign off on the materials as long as they stayed under 4,000. I've got the email confirmation right here. My heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't have an email confirmation. I didn't have the authority to sign off on anything. I looked over at Anthony, who was watching me with a puzzled expression. I realized then that someone had been using my name to make decisions. I hung up the phone and stared at the receiver for a long moment. The plastic felt warm and sticky against my palm. I looked at Anthony, who had shifted in his chair, his brow furrowed. What happened? He asked. Marcus thinks I approved a $4,000 flooring upgrade for 4th Street, I said. He says I sent an email. I haven't sent any emails to Marcus in 3 weeks. Anthony sighed and leaned back. Maybe it was a mistake. A typo in the address? He was very specific, Anthony. He said I told him Logan was on the fence, but that I gave the green light. I grabbed my phone and dialed Logan. He picked up on the 4th ring, the background noise sounding like a busy office. Phones ringing and the distant hum of a printer. Hey, Tanya. Everything okay with the books? Who told Marcus he could start the vinyl planks at 4th Street? I asked. I didn't lead with a greeting. There was a brief pause. I could hear him shift in his seat. Oh, that I handled it. I told Marcus to get it moving so we wouldn't lose the slot in his schedule. I might have mentioned you were on board with the quality of the materials. You told him I approved the quote, I said. He thinks I gave the authorization. Why would you do that? It just streamlines things, Tanya. He trusts you. If it comes from you, he doesn't haggle as much on the labor. It's all part of the same pot of money anyway. We're a team. I'm not a partner. Logan, I'm the person scrubbing the floors of my own house and then scrubbing your ledgers. If Marcus thinks I'm the one signing off, then I'm the one responsible when the budget blows out. You're overthinking it, Logan said, his voice sliding into that smooth, supervisory tone he used at the bank. It's a family venture. We're just helping each other get this off the ground. I'll take care of Marcus. Just keep the ledger updated. He hung up before I could argue. I set the phone face down on the table. The anger was a hot, tight knot in my chest, but beneath it was a sudden, sharp anxiety. If Logan was streamlining things by using my name, I wondered what else he was simplifying. I opened my banking app on my phone. Every first of the month, Logan was supposed to transfer a $500 management stipend into my account. It wasn't a salary. He'd insisted on that, but it was the agreed-upon payment for the hours I spent on the books and the tenant calls. It was June 2nd. I scrolled through the transaction history. The transfer wasn't there. I checked the previous month. May's payment had arrived on the 3rd late, but it was there. June was a blank space. I called him back immediately. He didn't answer. I sent a text. Where is the June stipend? 10 minutes later, the reply came. Cash flow is tight this month because of the 4th Street materials and a vacancy on Elm. I'll get it to you when things level out. We're all pitching in for the family right now. I felt a wave of nausea. Pitching in meant I was working for free while he used my reputation to manipulate contractors. I wasn't an employee. I had no contract, no tax forms, and apparently no guaranteed pay. I was just a convenient set of hands that he could switch on and off depending on his bank balance. Tanya? Anthony's voice broke through my thoughts. He was standing by the table now, looking tired. I really think I'm going to have to go in Saturday. My supervisor told me, if the payroll audit isn't clean by Monday, it's going to be a formal reprimand on my file. I'm worried about the tenure bonus if this goes on my record. I didn't even look at him. I was staring at the cash flow text, my mind racing through the hours I'd spent on the phone with angry tenants and the late nights I'd spent balancing those books. Anthony, I can't deal with your office drama right now, I snapped. Your boss is grumpy about some paperwork. I am being lied to and cheated out of my money by your brother. My entire professional reputation is being used as a shield for Logan's spending, and I'm not getting paid for the privilege. Your audit is a clerical issue. This is a betrayal. Anthony froze. He didn't argue, but the look on his face changed. The exhaustion was still there, but it was joined by a cold, distant sort of disappointment. He slowly stepped back from the table. "I just wanted to tell you," he said quietly. "I'll figure it out." He walked out of the room and went into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded final. I sat in the silence of the dining room, the humid Arkansas air pressing in through the screen door. I looked at the ledger, the neat columns of numbers that I had meticulously maintained. I had spent 3 years believing that my hard work was an investment in a future partnership, a way to secure something for myself and Anthony. I realized then that Logan didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as an asset, one that didn't require a paycheck or a legal contract. He called it loyalty because loyalty was free. I picked up the pen and looked at the 4th Street entry. I thought about Marcus and the luxury vinyl planks. I thought about the $500 that wasn't in my account. For the first time, the predictability of my routine felt less like a comfort and more like a cage. I wasn't just the daycare provider in this house. I was the unpaid secretary for a business that didn't officially acknowledge I existed. The silence between Anthony and me lasted through Sunday morning. He didn't yell or bring up the argument from Friday night. He just moved around the house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact while he packed a bag for the school office. He'd told me he was going in early Monday and Tuesday to finish that audit. And for once, I didn't comment on his schedule. I was too busy staring at my bank balance, which still hadn't budged. Logan and his wife, Brenda, stopped by Sunday afternoon around 4. They brought a platter of store-bought cookies and a smile that felt like a sales pitch. Logan walked into the dining room and looked at the ledger still open on the table. He didn't ask about the missing money. He just leaned over and pointed to a line item. "I think we can squeeze another $50 out of the landscaping budget for the Elm property," he said, his tone breezy. "If we cut the mulch grade, we can afford the better weed killer." I didn't move. "I'm not updating the ledger until my stipend is in my account, Logan." Brenda, who was setting the cookies down on the counter, let out a small tinkling laugh. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. "Oh, Tanya, don't be like that. We're all in a bit of a pinch right now. Logan's putting so much into the properties to make sure they're top-notch for the long haul." "I'm in a pinch too," I said. "I'm the one doing the work. I'm the one Marcus thinks is authorizing $4,000 upgrades." Brenda stepped closer, placing a hand on my arm. Her nails were perfectly manicured, a sharp contrast to the scrubbed raw skin of my own knuckles. "Honey, you've always been the rock of this family. You're so good at the organizing side of things." "It's just family duty, really. We all chip in where we can. Logan handles the big risks, and you handle the details. It's a beautiful way to support each other." The words felt like a slap. Family duty to Brenda, my labor wasn't a professional contribution or a negotiated agreement. It was a personality trait. It was something I owed them because I was the rock. The term loyalty that Logan used was just a prettier word for unpaid. "I'm not a charity," I told her, pulling my arm away. Logan sighed, the sound of a patient man dealing with a difficult child. "Look, we can talk about the formal structure later. Right now, we're in the middle of a growth phase. Let's not let a few $100s get in the way of the big picture." They left an hour later, leaving the cookies and a heavy, suffocating feeling in my chest. I looked at Anthony, who was sitting in the living room reading a manual for the school's new payroll system. He didn't look up. He didn't offer a supportive word or tell Logan he was wrong. He just kept reading, his shoulders hunched. Tuesday morning arrived with a sudden, violent spring storm. The rain hammered against the ranch house roof, the kind of Arkansas downpour that turns the backyard into a swamp in 20 minutes. I had 5 children in the house, including a fussy 18-month-old who wouldn't stop crying. Around 10, I heard a strange, rhythmic thumping coming from the hallway. I walked toward the kitchen and stopped dead. A pipe under the sink had finally given way, and a steady, pulsing stream of brown water was geysering onto the linoleum I had spent so much time scrubbing. It wasn't just a leak. It was a flood. Within minutes, the water had reached the edge of the play area where the toddlers were sitting with their blocks. "Everyone, back in the den now," I shouted, ushering the kids away from the water. I scrambled for the shut-off valve, but the handle was rusted solid. I yanked at it, my shoulder screaming, but it wouldn't budge. The water was spreading fast, soaking into the baseboards of the older house. I felt a surge of panic. If the water hit the electrical outlets along the baseboard, I'd have to evacuate the kids into the rain. I grabbed my phone and dialed Anthony. I knew he was at the school, but I figured he could leave for 20 minutes to help me shut off the main water line in the yard or call a plumber he trusted from the school's facilities list. He picked up on the third ring. The background was a chaos of ringing phones and shouting voices. "Anthony, the kitchen pipe burst," I gasped, my voice shaking. "The house is flooding. I can't get the valve to turn. I need you to come home and shut off the main line, or help me find a plumber who can get here in 10 minutes. I have 5 kids in the den and the water is hitting the outlets." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, slow and heavy. "I can't, Tanya," he said. "What do you mean you can't? The house is flooding." "I'm in the middle of the audit," Anthony replied, his voice flat and devoid of the usual urgency. "My supervisor is sitting right next to me. I told you on Friday that if this wasn't clean by Monday or Tuesday, I was looking at a formal reprimand. I can't walk out of this office right now. Not after you told me my problems were just office drama." I stared at the brown water swirling around my ankles. "Anthony, this is an emergency. This isn't paperwork." "It's an emergency for my career," he said quietly. "You ranked my stress as a small problem. I'm just following your lead. Call a plumber, Tanya. You're the one who handles the contractors." The line went dead. I stood there in the middle of my kitchen, the cold water soaking through my socks. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. I had spent years making sure everyone else's needs were met. The toddlers, the tenants, Logan's ego, and when Anthony had reached out for a shred of empathy regarding his own livelihood, I had pushed him away, because I felt my burden was heavier. I had taught him that his stress didn't matter. Now, when I actually needed him to show up, he was simply mirroring the value I had placed on his life. I spent the next 2 hours fighting with a plumbing company that wouldn't send a technician out in the storm for another 4 hours. I ended up dragging the kids into the den and using every towel in the house to dam the water, my back aching and my hands shaking. By the time the water stopped, the linoleum was warped and the baseboards were stained. I sat on the floor of the den, surrounded by confused children and damp towels, and looked at the phone. I thought about Logan and Brenda and their family duty. I thought about the $500 I was owed. And I thought about the look on Anthony's face when I'd told him his life was just a clerical issue. I realized that being the rock didn't mean I was strong. It just meant I was the only thing everyone felt they could step on without it breaking. The smell of damp drywall and stagnant pipe water hung heavy in the house for 3 days. I spent those days scrubbing the baseboards with a mixture of vinegar and bleach, trying to save the wood from warping further. Every time I looked at the stained linoleum, I thought about the silence on the phone when Anthony told me he couldn't come home. Anthony came back on Tuesday evening, his face tight and his eyes bloodshot. He didn't apologize for not coming home, but he didn't bring it up either. He just walked into the kitchen, looked at the damp patches on the floor, and sighed. He started unloading the dishwasher, the clink of plates the only sound between us. "I finished the audit," he said, not looking at me. "My supervisor signed off on it. I'm not getting the reprimand." I stopped scrubbing and sat back on my heels, my hands red and pruned. "I'm glad, Anthony." He stopped with a plate in his hand. "You told me my life was a clerical issue, Tonya. You decided that because you were tired and stressed, my stress didn't count. You just ranked my problems as small without even asking me how bad it actually was." I looked at the floor. The guilt I'd felt on Friday had grown into something heavier, something that felt like a physical weight in my stomach. "You're right, I did. I felt like I was carrying everything, and I didn't think your paperwork was as heavy as my day. I shouldn't have decided that for you." Anthony didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. He just put the plate in the cupboard and walked away. We weren't fixed, but the air had cleared enough for us to breathe. On Thursday, Logan pulled into the driveway around noon. He didn't come inside at first. He stayed in his truck, leaning on the horn. I walked out onto the porch, still wearing my apron, my hair tied back in a messy knot. "Tonya, I've got a crisis," he shouted through the open window. "The tenant on Elm is threatening to withhold rent because the HVAC is rattling. I need you to call the technician and get him scheduled for tomorrow morning. I can't get a hold of the guy, but he always answers you." I didn't move. I leaned against the porch railing and looked at him. No, Logan blinked, his expression shifting from urgency to confusion. "What do you mean, no? I'm in a meeting all afternoon. Just make the call." "I'm not making the call, Logan. I'm not updating the ledger, and I'm not managing your tenants. I'm done." Logan climbed out of the truck, his face hardening. He walked up the steps, his polished dress shoes clicking on the wood. "Now look, I know you're upset about the stipend, and I'll get that to you by next Friday. But this is a business. We can't just stop because you're having a bad week. It's a family venture, remember? It's not a venture if I'm the only one doing the labor for free," I said. "And it's not a partnership if you're lying to contractors using my name?" Logan scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "I told you, that was just to streamline things. It was a shortcut." "It wasn't a shortcut, Logan. It was a choice. You chose to hide the fact that you were spending money I hadn't approved, and you chose to make me the face of that decision, so you wouldn't have to deal with the fallout. You didn't have a difficult conversation with me about the budget, because then you'd have to treat me like an actual partner with a vote. You chose concealment because it kept you in control." For the first time in years, Logan didn't have a smooth answer. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He looked at the house, then back at me. He knew that without me, the streamlined version of his business was actually a chaotic mess of unreturned emails and mismatched receipts. He didn't know the technician's middle name. He didn't know which tenant had a dog that chewed the carpets. He didn't know where the 4th Street files were kept. "You're really going to tank a family business over a few $100s?" he asked, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "I'm not tanking anything. I'm just stepping out of the way," I replied. "If you want the HVAC fixed on Elm, you can find the technician's number in the blue folder on my dining room table. But you'll have to ask me for the key to the house first." Logan stared at me for a long minute. I could see the gears turning. The calculation of how many hours he'd have to spend on the phone if I stopped answering. He knew I was the rock, and he had finally realized that the rock could move. "Fine," he spat. "What do you want?" "I want a legal contract," I said. "I want a titled percentage of the management company, a guaranteed monthly salary that hits my account on the 1st of the month, and a written agreement that no financial commitment over $500 is made without my signature. No more family duty. No more pitching in. I want a job description and a paycheck." Logan looked like he wanted to argue, but then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and groaned. "It's the Elm tenant again." "Good luck with that," I said, and I turned around and walked back into my house. I went into the kitchen and looked at the warped linoleum. I didn't feel the sudden rush of victory I'd expected. I just felt tired. I felt the weight of the last 3 years of being overlooked. Anthony was in the living room when I came back in. He looked up from his book. "Did he leave?" "He did," I said. "He's going to bring a contract." Anthony nodded slowly. He didn't smile, but he stood up and walked over to me. He didn't hug me, but he put a hand on my shoulder. A small, concrete gesture of support that felt more honest than any of Logan's promises. "I'll help you look over the paperwork when he brings it," Anthony said. "I'm pretty good at spotting the glitches in the fine print." I leaned into him for a second, closing my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to tell him that my day had been harder than his. I just let him be there. 2 weeks later, Logan sat at my dining room table. He looked annoyed, but he pushed a folder across the wood. Inside was a formal operating agreement and a check for the missing June and July stipends. He had formalized my role as the managing partner, with a fixed salary and a legal share of the profits. He didn't say he was sorry for the lying, but he signed the papers in front of me, his pen scratching harshly against the parchment. I signed my name beneath his. I didn't do it for the money, though the money was necessary. I did it because I was tired of being the only person in the room who knew where everything was, while being the only person who wasn't allowed to own any of it. I closed the folder and pushed it toward him. Now, I said, about that HVAC on Elm. I spent the next hour on the phone with the HVAC technician, coordinating a time that wouldn't interfere with the tenant's work schedule. Logan sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, occasionally humming a tune that sounded like he'd already forgotten the tension of the last few weeks. He looked at me once, a brief, questioning glance, as if wondering if I was still playing the part of the disgruntled employee. I didn't look back. I just finished the call and logged the appointment in the shared digital calendar we'd finally set up. By October, the humidity had finally broken, and the Arkansas air turned crisp and smelling of dried corn husks. The daycare was in a steady rhythm. I had a new 3-year-old who loved to paint with his fingers and a toddler who had finally mastered the art of the nap. My bank account looked different too. On the first of every month, the salary Logan had agreed to hit my account without me having to ask. Prompt and precise, the real test came on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-October. I was in the middle of snack time, handing out sliced pears and cheese cubes, when Logan pulled into the driveway. He didn't honk this time. He walked straight into the house and into the kitchen, smelling of expensive cologne and cold air. I need you to sign off on a quote for the 4th Street place, he said, sliding a piece of paper across the counter. The back fence is leaning bad after that windstorm last week. I already talked to a guy, a cousin of a friend, and he can get it fixed by Friday for $1,200. I looked at the paper. It wasn't a formal quote. It was a handwritten note on a piece of yellow legal pad. There was no company name, no tax ID, just a total at the bottom and a signature that looked like a scribble. Who is this? I asked. I told you, a contact. He's reliable, Logan said, leaning against the counter. I already told him to go ahead and buy the cedar posts. He just needs the authorization so he can build a business account. I set the paper down. You already told him to buy the materials? Yeah, it streamlines things, Tanya. If we wait for a formal bid process, the price of lumber might jump again. Just sign the bottom so he can get started. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, but it wasn't the panic I'd felt during the flood. It was a cold, clear recognition. This was the shortcut again. This was the family venture logic that allowed him to make decisions and leave me to manage the fallout. I'm not signing a handwritten note from a contact for $1,200, I said. The agreement says any expenditure over $500 requires a formal quote and my signature before the work begins. You already bypassed that by telling him to buy the materials. Logan sighed. The same patient sound he used when he thought I was being difficult. Come on, Tanya, it's a fence. It's not a luxury vinyl floor, we're family. Why are you acting like a corporate auditor? Because for 3 years, family was the reason I didn't get paid, and the reason my name was used to trick contractors, I replied. If this guy is reliable, he can send a proper invoice with a business header. Until then, I'm not authorizing the payment. Logan stared at me. For a moment, I thought he might yell, but he just looked tired. He realized that the rock he used to lean on had developed a hard edge. He couldn't just slide a piece of yellow paper across the table and expect me to make the problem disappear. Fine, he muttered, grabbing the paper. I'll tell him to send a real quote, but if the price goes up because he has to spend time on paperwork, that's on you. I can live with that, I said. He left without another word. I went back to the children, helping the 3-year-old wipe blue paint off his chin. I didn't feel a rush of triumph, just a quiet sense of stability. I had stopped being the shock absorber for Logan's impulsiveness. That evening, after the kids were gone and the house was quiet, I sat at the dining room table with Anthony. We were paying the electric bill and checking the household budget. The air in the room felt lighter than it had in years. Logan stopped by today, I told him. Tried to get me to sign off on a fence without a quote. Anthony looked up from the laptop. Did you sign it? No. He didn't ask why. He didn't tell me I was being too hard on his brother. He just nodded. Good. I'm glad you didn't. I looked at him, really looked at him, and remembered the day of the flood. I remembered how I dismissed his career crisis as office drama, because I thought my stress was more valid. I had spent so much time ranking everyone's problems that I'd forgotten that a marriage isn't a competition of who has it worse. It's just two people trying to keep their heads above water. I'm sorry again about that Tuesday in June, I said softly. About how I talked to you. Anthony paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He didn't give me a cinematic forgiveness speech. He just reached over and squeezed my hand, his grip firm and calloused. We both had a bad run, Tanya, he said. Just don't start ranking my problems again. I don't think my ego can take it. I laughed, a real, genuine sound that felt foreign in my own throat. I realized then that the cost of my strength had been a certain kind of loneliness. By insisting on being the rock for everyone, I'd made myself a statue. Something people relied on, but something they didn't actually talk to. I looked around my kitchen, at the linoleum that was still slightly warped in the corner, and the dining table that was no longer a chaotic headquarters for someone else's empire. It was just a table in a ranch house in Jonesboro. It was where I did my books, where I ate dinner with my husband, and where I finally learned how to say no. I wasn't the rock anymore. I was just a woman with a job, a paycheck, and a husband who actually knew how to spot a glitch in the fine print. It was enough.